Hi everybody, guess who's back again after a very long break? It's Sam and welcome to Sam's Diaries. I hope you enjoy today's stories and please stay tuned for more.
To you, Junyi said, raising his glass, the last man standing. Gone, finished and done. Chris grabbed his own glass and clinked it hard. Proudly done. He leaned back in his chair, the grin on his face, the kind that didn't come from the drink. 1 week, man, 1 more week and I'll be a husband. Husband. Junyi repeated the word like he was tasting something foreign. Sounds heavy. Feels right. Chris pointed his glass at him. And you wouldn't know because you've never stayed with a woman long enough to find out. Junyi pressed a hand to his chest in mock offense. I stay for a beautiful amount of time. I just believe in giving each woman the gift of my presence and then gracefully, running away. I'd rather call it moving on. They both burst out laughing, the kind that filled the whole room. Outside, the evening was settling into gold. Inside, it felt like the best kind of ordinary, 2 men who had been friends since they were teenagers, sitting across from each other as one of them was getting married in a few days. Chris set his glass down and tilted his head. Seriously though, when are you going to stop all this, Junyi? When are you going to find someone and finally settle down? Junyi swirled his drink slowly. When the right woman shows up and makes it impossible to leave. What does that look like to you? I'll know when I see her, he grinned. But until then there are so many women in this world, Chris, so many, it would be selfish of me to deprive them. Chris groaned, then a slow smile stretched across his face, the kind that meant he was thinking. Okay, Chris said, sitting up. Let's make this interesting. A bet. Bet. If you find a girlfriend, a real one, not some 2-day situationship, before the wedding celebrations are fully over, I'll do anything you ask. Anything. Junyi's eyes lit up immediately. He had a list, a very long list of things he had been trying to get Chris to do for years. He extended his hand across the table without even a second of hesitation. Done. They shook on it. Chris was still laughing when the front door creaked open. The sound of wheels rolling across the floor made both of them turn. Standing in the doorway with a large box rolling behind her, slightly out of breath but smiling with her lips pressed together, was a woman. Ginger hair, long and wavy, spilled over her shoulders, catching the last of the evening light. Her glasses framed brown eyes that swept the room quickly before landing on them. Is this a private party? She said. Or can I join in? Chris was on his feet instantly. Sylvia, she laughed and let go of the box just in time for Chris to crash into her with a full hug, lifting her slightly off the ground. You actually came. I thought your flight was tomorrow. I moved it up. I wanted to surprise you. She hugged him back tightly, and when she pulled away there were the beginnings of tears in her eyes that she blinked back quickly. I wasn't going to miss a single day of this. Chris cupped her face. Look at you, you're all grown up. Junyi hadn't moved. He was still seated at the table, his glass halfway to his mouth, completely frozen. Because he had known Chris was getting married. He had planned for this week, and at no point in any of it had he prepared himself for Sylvia. 12 years. She had been gone for 12 years. She had left career after college to go further her studies and she had never come back, and the two of them had not spoken a single word to each other since the night she confessed his feelings to her and he had rejected her. He had convinced himself that the guilt had faded, that enough time had passed, but now she was here, in this house, standing 3 meters away from him, and the guilt came back so fast it felt like a fist to the ribs. Sylvia turned from Chris and her gaze found Junyi. There was no warmth in it, but there was no open hostility either. It was the careful, measured look of a woman who had practiced this exact moment in her head and decided she would not flinch. Long time no see, she said. He found his voice from somewhere. Welcome, 1 word, that was all he gave her. Even to his own ears it sounded terrible, flat and thin and offering nothing. Chris's phone buzzed loudly on the table. He glanced at it and sighed. Sorry, I have to take this. He stepped away toward the hallway, and just like that it was the two of them. Sylvia picked up the handle of her box and started rolling it slowly toward the staircase. She wasn't running, but she wasn't lingering either. Then she stopped just briefly without fully turning around. You don't seem very happy that I'm here. Junyi straightened. I just wasn't expecting you. That what it is? She turned enough to look at him over her shoulder. Her voice was even, calm, the kind of calm that was clearly constructed. Then let me make it easier for you. I'm not the same girl I was 12 years ago, Junyi. That girl who stood in front of you shaking and told you she liked you and walked away crying. She's been gone for a long time, so you don't have to be uncomfortable. I've grown past it. She turned back to the staircase, lifted the front of the box slightly over the first step, and kept going. Junyi stood there and watched her disappear down the corridor above, and the words she had just said settled over him like something cold. He returned to his seat, picked up his glass but put it down without drinking. If he had known she was coming, he would have found some excuse, something gracious but firm. He would have sent a gift, something generous, and stayed at home. It wasn't that he was cruel, he would never deliberately hurt Chris's celebration. But this, an entire week, in the same house with the woman he had rejected 12 years ago who was also his best friend's sister. He ran a hand through his hair and exhaled slowly. 1 week. He had to survive 1 week. Upstairs, Sylvia unzipped her suitcase with more force than necessary and began pulling her things out. She hung her dresses one by one, arranged her books on the desk in the corner, set her glasses case on the nightstand and took a breath. She had rehearsed this. She had truly, genuinely rehearsed this. She had known Junyi would be here, Chris had mentioned it months ago, and she had stood in front of her bathroom mirror in London and practiced being unbothered. And for the most part she had walked in, she had smiled, she had said the right things, but his face, the way it had gone so still when he saw her. Like a man who had walked into a room and found something he had been trying to forget, she clenched her fists around the fabric of one of her blouses. 12 years, not a single message, not a call, not even when Chris had mentioned she was doing well, not even then had Junyi thought to reach out. He had cut her off cleanly and completely, and she had spent years convincing herself that it hadn't mattered. But the second she walked through that door and saw him sitting there, laughing, looking exactly like himself with that ridiculous hair and that easy smile, all of it came rushing back like water through a broken wall. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms flat on her thighs. No. She was done with that version of herself. She had come here for Chris, for her brother's wedding, and she was going to be present and joyful and completely, devastatingly fine. And if it happened to make Junyi squirm a little, well, that was simply a bonus. The next morning arrived with more luggage, more voices, and more cars pulling up outside than the house had probably seen in years. The family home was large enough to hold them all comfortably. Chris had made sure of that, and by noon the groomsmen and the bridesmaids were filling the hallways with laughter and the particular electricity of people who were thrilled to be in the same place. Junyi was already downstairs when they arrived, and the ease of old friendship folded over him immediately. He was laughing, leaning against the wall with a drink in hand, in the middle of a story that had 2 of the groomsmen nearly doubled over, and then he heard her voice. He didn't look up immediately, but then he did. Sylvia was coming down the staircase with Lily, and the 2 of them were deep in conversation, their heads slightly inclined toward each other, Lily's hand gesturing as she spoke. Sylvia listened with her chin tilted up slightly, a small smile curving the corner of her mouth. She was wearing something simple, a cream blouse, dark trousers, her ginger hair pinned partially back with a few waves loose around her face. Her glasses sat on the bridge of her nose. Junyi looked away before she got to the bottom. Sylvia, Namju, who had been beside Junyi, suddenly straightened like a man who had received an electric shock. Sylvia came back. Apparently, Junyi said into his glass. Namju was already staring. She looks completely different. She looks really good, like really, really good. Several of the others had noticed too. There was a soft wave of murmurs. Sylvia, for her part, was greeting people warmly. She remembered names, asked questions, laughed genuinely. She was completely at ease in a way that 12 years ago Sylvia had never managed in a crowd. Then Namju turned to Junyi with a look that was almost thoughtful. Hey, would you mind if I tried asking Sylvia out? Junyi's drink went down the wrong way. He coughed once sharp and recovered quickly enough that he hoped it looked like nothing. Why are you asking me? Because. Namju gave him the kind of smile that knew too much. I remember that she had a major thing for you back in the day. Didn't want to step on anything. That was 12 years ago. Junyi's voice was steady, perfectly steady. She's obviously moved on, and the person you should be asking is Chris. He's her brother. Namju studied him for just a beat too long. Then he grinned, unbothered, and shrugged. Fair enough. He walked off in Sylvia's direction, and Junyi watched him go with an expression that he told himself was neutral. It was not particularly neutral. Upstairs, Lily had pulled Sylvia into her room to show her the wedding dress hanging on the back of the wardrobe door like a cloud brought indoors. Sylvia reached out and touched the hem with the tips of her fingers. Lily, this is stunning, isn't it? Lily turned to admire it herself, then glanced at Sylvia sideways. So, you've been home less than 24 hours. A pause. Have you spoken to Junyi properly yet? Sylvia's hand dropped from the dress. There's nothing to speak about. You've been avoiding him, been greeting people. There are a lot of people here. Sylvia. Lily tilted her head, her expression the particular combination of gentle and stubborn that had made her one of Sylvia's favourite people. You know he watched you come down the stairs this morning and then stared very hard at the wall for a long time. Sylvia was quiet. Then, good then, what does that have to do with me? Lily laughed, and in her head very quietly something clicked into place. She kept the smile to herself as she began zipping the dress bag back up. That evening, Lily sat beside Chris on the couch long after the others had dispersed, her head on his shoulder, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his arm. Cake, she said eventually. Chris tilted his head toward her. What about it? I was thinking, instead of you going to pick it up, why not send someone else? It's a bit of a drive. I don't want you exhausted before your own wedding. Chris considered this. I mean, yeah, I can ask one of the guys. I was thinking Junyi, another pause, and maybe Sylvia could go too. She doesn't know many of the bridesmaids yet and I don't want her to feel like she has no role. Chris nodded easily. That makes sense, good thinking. He pressed a kiss to her temple, completely oblivious. Lily smiled at the wall. The bachelorette and bachelor celebrations came together that night in the living room, a party that had found its own rhythm by 9, music, laughter, the kind of warmth that came from people who were all genuinely happy to be there. Streamers and fairy lights had been strung up by the bridesmaids, and someone had arranged a dessert table along the far wall that was being steadily dismantled by the groomsmen. Junyi was in the middle of a toast, a good one, the kind that got laughs and then a few honest sighs, when the music shifted slightly and someone at the bottom of the stairs whistled low. He turned. Lily came first, and she was beautiful, that wasn't a question. The room gave her the response she deserved, cheers and raised glasses, but behind her was Sylvia. And the thing that hit him before he could prepare, she wasn't wearing her glasses. Instead, soft brown contact lenses replaced them, and without the frames her face was just fully visible, every line of it. Her ginger hair fell loose and free over her shoulders, catching the warm light of the room, and her dress, something gold, fitted, quiet in its confidence, made a statement without asking for attention. She blinked once as she reached the bottom of the stairs, scanning the room, and for exactly half a second her eyes found Junyi's. He looked away. He was sure he looked away first. He hoped he looked away first. Across the room, Namju was already moving. Junyi stayed where he was and took a very long sip of his drink. He told himself he wasn't watching. He was simply facing that direction. It was where he happened to be looking. Namju said something to Sylvia that made her tip her head back slightly and laugh. Not a performance, a real one. And then his hand was extended, and she was taking it, and they were moving toward the small cleared space where a few other couples had begun to sway. The thing Junyi felt in his chest right then had no polite name. It was sharp and irrational and entirely inconvenient, and he did not appreciate it. He moved to the edge of the room. He looked at his drink. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at everything except the dance floor before he gave up entirely and looked at the dance floor. Namju leaned in to say something else. Sylvia smiled just slightly, the corner of her mouth, and Junyi's cheek tightened. Chris appeared at his elbow and tilted his head toward the balcony. Come outside for a minute, Junyi followed. The night air outside was cool and the noise of the party became a muffle behind the glass door. Chris turned to him with an expression that wasn't quite serious but wasn't playing either. He crossed his arms. I just want to say something and I want you to hear it. Okay, you don't have feelings for my sister, right? Junyi blinked. Then he laughed. He made sure it came out clean. What? No, where is this coming from? I'm watching you, man. You've been at the edge of the room for the last 20 minutes and your eyes keep going somewhere they probably shouldn't. You've been staring at her. I'm just tired. It was a long drive here. Chris looked at him for a moment. Then something in his expression shifted, softened almost. Look, it's not that I wouldn't trust you with her in theory. It's just I do trust you. That's the problem. I trust you enough to know that if you break her heart, I'll also lose my best friend. And I can't afford either of those things, you understand? Something complicated passed through Junyi's chest. He nodded. I understand. Chris relaxed, clapped him on the shoulder. Besides, she's not your type, right? You've always gone for those high heels and attitude women. Junyi laughed lightly. Right, she's definitely not my type. Perfect. Chris nodded, satisfied. They did not know that behind the curtain at the edge of the balcony doorway, half in shadow, Sylvia had been standing there. She had seen Chris pull Junyi aside. She had followed quietly, curious. She had stood just inside the curtain, close enough to hear every word. She's definitely not your type. She stood very still. The party continued behind her. The music swelled. Someone laughed too loudly. She turned and walked quietly up the stairs before anyone could see her face. She made it to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed. She had promised herself, she had made herself a very specific promise that she was done with crying over Junyi. She didn't even make it a minute before her eyes filled. She didn't let herself sob. She just sat with it and she let a few stubborn tears fall and then she wiped them away with the back of her hand. "Okay," she said to the empty room. "Okay, that's the last one." She meant it this time. She was going to get over him once and for all. Starting now, the next morning, Lily found her at breakfast and delivered the news brightly. "Cake is ready," she said, sitting down across from Sylvia with her tea. "But someone needs to go pick it up. It's a bit of a drive, maybe a couple of hours out of town. Would you be okay to go?" "Of course." Sylvia reached for her toast. "I'd love the drive, actually." "Wonderful. I've already asked one of Chris's friends to go with you." Lily sipped her tea, Sylvia nodded and didn't ask who. She went upstairs, got dressed, pulled her hair into a loose wave over one shoulder and came back down. She pushed through the front door and stopped, leaning against the driver's side of the car, arms loosely crossed, looking like he hadn't expected this to go this way either. Was Junyi. He saw her at the same moment. He pushed off the car slightly. "You're the one coming for the cake?" he asked. "The one they sent." Her voice came out even. There was silence. She could see the hesitation in him, the same one she felt, but she was not going to be the one to blink. She walked to the passenger side. "Let's just go." He said nothing and got in. The first 40 minutes of the drive were conducted in almost complete silence. Sylvia had her elbow on the window ledge and was watching the landscape shift as they moved out of the city, buildings giving way to trees, giving way to open stretches of road. Junyi drove with his eyes straight ahead, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his knee. Neither of them spoke. The silence was not comfortable. Then Junyi said, "How have you been?" She didn't look at him. "Fine, since you left in general. How's London?" Sylvia exhaled through her nose. "I studied, I worked a lot, I have a small group of friends I actually like, I read books, I drink too much tea." She paused. "I've been fine, Junyi." "Do you like it there?" She turned and looked at him for the first time since they'd gotten in the car. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because we're in a car for 2 hours and the silence is honest." He glanced at her briefly. His jaw moved slightly. "I was going to say uncomfortable." "You maybe." She turned back to the window. He let another mile pass. "Then will you go back after the wedding?" "Yes." Something shifted in his expression. She wasn't looking at him, so she didn't see it. He stared at the road and felt an odd reluctance settle in him, the kind that didn't have a logical source. He wanted to say something like don't, something like stay a little longer, but he had no right to either of those sentences, not even close, so he said nothing and kept driving. The cake shop was in a small town that was also, it turned out, home to a bridal boutique connected to the same building. The shop was airy and white-walled, ribbon and lace displayed in the front windows, wedding cakes arranged like architecture in a glass-fronted counter along one side. Junyi went in to speak with the staff about the cake pickup. Sylvia waited near the entrance, her eyes drifting over the displays without any particular intention. "Excuse me," she turned. A young shop assistant was smiling at her a little nervously, holding a folded gown over one arm. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but we're actually looking for a model to try on one of our sample dresses for an in-store display photo. It would only take about 15 minutes. You have exactly the right look. Would you be willing?" Sylvia blinked. "I'm just here for a cake." I know, but it really would be brief. We'll have you changed and back out before your party finishes the paperwork." The girl smiled hopefully. Sylvia looked across at Junyi, who was deep in a conversation with the counter staff, his back to her. "Fine," she said. "Why not?" She was taken to a dressing room in the back of the boutique section. The dress they brought her was simple in the way that the most expensive things often were: draped fabric, a long, clean line, a neckline that was quietly dramatic without trying to be. She stood in front of the fitting room mirror and looked at herself for a long moment. She had taken off her glasses to change. Without them, her reflection looked like someone she only occasionally recognized. Outside, one of the shop assistants had gone looking for the man who had come in with the woman trying the dress. "Would you come see the dress, sir? We'd love a second opinion for the display photo." Junyi, confused but obliging, followed her through the connecting door into the boutique. She pointed toward the fitting room. "She should be stepping out now." He turned. Sylvia walked out. She had her glasses off. The dress was white and draped and fell all the way to the floor, and her ginger hair was loose and catching the boutique's warm light. She was looking down, adjusting the fabric at her hip so she didn't see him immediately. When she looked up and found him standing there, she stopped. He said absolutely nothing. He was completely, perfectly still. "What are you doing here?" she asked. He gestured vaguely. "They asked me to come." "They thought I was." The shop assistant, realizing her error, quickly murmured, "Sorry, I thought he was your boyfriend or something," and retreated in the way of people who know they've created a situation. Sylvia looked at the floor. He looked at her. The dress caught the light softly. She reached behind her toward the zip. "Already done with this?" "Get back into my clothes, it won't." She twisted her arm behind her. The zipper moved half an inch and stuck. She tried again. It didn't move. She tried 3 more times. Nothing. Junyi watched this happen. He cleared his throat. "Do you need help with that?" No. He waited. She tried again. The zipper held firm, completely committed to its new position, which was stuck. "Sylvia, I can just help you. I have it." "You clearly don't have it." She twisted further, face tightening with the effort. "Going to tear the dress. Then I'll pay for the dress." "With what? The cake money?" He stepped forward. "Let me help you." "Don't need your. It will take a minute." He was already behind her. "Hold still." She stiffened. He reached for the zip. His fingers found the fabric just above it, holding it steady the way you had to with a stuck zipper, and he eased it carefully downward a centimeter. Stop moving, he said quietly. Not moving. Your shoulder just moved. That's just how my shoulders are. Then can your shoulders please cooperate for literally 4 more seconds? Can you please just? The zipper released. Both of them exhaled. He stepped back immediately. She grabbed the back of the dress and turned around, and for a moment they were standing closer than they had been in 12 years, close enough that she could see the small crease between his brows, and he could see the exact color of her eyes without the glasses. She stepped back. He stepped back. Thank you, she said. Welcome. The word sat between them like a small, private echo, the same word he had given her when she arrived. Both of them heard it. Neither of them mentioned it. The cake was a 3-tier, ivory-frosted creation that the shop staff had boxed and braced with professional thoroughness. It took 3 people to carry it to the car. They laid it across the back seat with the kind of care usually reserved for newborns, and both Sylvia and Jun-Yi stood back and looked at it for a moment before getting in. I think I should drive. The cake would be more safe that way, Sylvia said. I drive just fine and I have the keys. Which I'm asking you to give me. The car is Chris's. He gave them to me. I don't think my driving is something you should worry about. She pressed her lips together and got into the passenger seat. He got in and pulled out of the parking lot. 20 minutes into the drive back, Sylvia reached for the AC dial and turned it down. Jun-Yi turned it back up. Don't you think it's warm? Well, I'm cold. You literally have a cardigan on. I'm still cold. She turned it down again. He turned it up again. If you're cold, the cardigan is right there for a reason. The cardigan is decorative. Decorative cardigan. He repeated this flatly. That you are wearing. I'm wearing it loosely. It tightly then. I don't want to wear it tightly. Then where? He stopped, took a breath. Then I will keep the AC where it is and you will be fine. She turned it down a 3rd time, then folded her arms and looked out the window with the complete serenity of a woman who had won. Suddenly something shot out of the trees at the side of the road. A dog, or possibly the world's largest cat. There would be debate on this later. Launched itself into the middle of the road with the full confidence of an animal that had never once considered consequences. Jun-Yi slammed the brakes and the car stopped. The silence that followed lasted about a minute. Then from the back seat came a sound. A soft, devastating sliding sound, followed by a small but final-sounding thud. Both of them turned slowly. The bottom 2 tiers of the cake were fine. The top tier had made a journey. It sat at an angle against the back seat, smudging its cream in the soufflé, and the little groom figurine that had been standing proudly on top had parted ways with his head. The ceramic head sat 2 inches away from the body, perfectly still, looking at nothing. They both stared at it. Then Sylvia said, very carefully, I told you I should have driven. If you hadn't been distracting me with the AC argument. I was distracting you. The dog jumped out of nowhere. I was watching the road. Then you turned that dial and I looked. Are you blamming the decapitated cake groom on me? I'm blamming the decapitated cake groom on the AC dial and the choices we both made today. She turned back to the front. He turned back to the front. Up ahead, a rest stop sign appeared. He pulled in without a word. They came down to have a better look at the mess they had caused. The headless groom figurine on the table between them wrapped in a paper napkin, like a patient at a very small hospital. They tried 3 different things to reattach the head. None of them worked. They drove back to the cake shop. The staff received them with a mixture of professionalism and barely concealed alarm. The damaged tier was whisked away for repair. Jun-Yi and Sylvia were told it would take at least 2 hours. They sat down in the small waiting area by the window. Outside, the sky had been turning grey for the last half hour, and as they sat, the first drops of rain began to hit the glass. Then more. Then the kind of rain that arrived with full commitment. They watched it for a while. Neither of them spoke. Then Sylvia laughed. It was a small sound, startled out of her really, and she pressed her hand over her mouth immediately. But it kept coming. Jun-Yi looked at her, and the ridiculousness of the last 4 hours, the zipper, the AC war, the dog, the headless groom, crashed over him at the same time, and he started laughing too. Figurine's head, she managed, just rolling away. With such dignity, like it had somewhere better to be. They were both laughing properly now, and the laughter broke something open. The room felt different, warmer. The rain came down harder on the glass. When it settled, they were both quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, softer. The heavy kind had gone. Then Sylvia stopped smiling. She looked at the rain. Her voice came out different, lower, not angry, just honest. I heard you on the balcony last night. Warmth in the room changed. Jun-Yi went still. I heard you tell Chris I wasn't your type. She turned to look at him directly. You're still exactly the same as you were 12 years ago, rejecting me at the slightest opportunity you have. He met her eyes and didn't look away. A long silence. The rain continued, then something in him gave way, like a wall that had been holding too much for too long, finally deciding it was done. I lied, he said. She blinked. I lied to Chris. Because right before he came to get me, he basically told me that if I had feelings for you, I'd be risking losing my best friend and hurting you at the same time. And I didn't have a good enough argument against that, so I gave him the answer he wanted. He paused. And 12 years ago, when you told me how you felt, he exhaled slowly. I didn't reject you because I didn't like you, Sylvia. I rejected you because I valued Chris more than I valued my own honesty. Because I was afraid of what would happen to the three of us if something went wrong. Sylvia stared at him. Her expression was very still. So you let me leave, she said quietly. You let me go to London thinking you didn't care for 12 years. I know, his voice was low. I know exactly what I did, and I know I don't get to just say it and have it be fixed. Outside, the rain came down in sheets. The cake shop hummed quietly around them. Sylvia looked at the window for a long moment. Something behind her eyes was working through something complicated. I still feel things, she said finally, quietly, like it cost her something. I hate that I do. I've spent a long time trying not to, but I do. He looked at her. I do too, he said. She turned to him, her eyes both in shock and disbelief. For the first time, he didn't look away. I'm sorry for avoiding you. I'm sorry for prioritizing my friendship with your brother over you. I was just a coward. And I really honestly do like you, more than you can imagine. The rain didn't stop. Neither did they by the time the cake was repaired and the sky had cleared to a pale, washed-out gold. Something had shifted between them, permanent, irreversible, the way only honest conversations can shift things. Walking back to the car, Jun-Yi said, the wedding is in 3 days. If Chris finds out about us before then, it could become a whole. It would derail everything. Sylvia nodded slowly. For Lily especially. So we wait until after. She looked at him. He stopped walking and turned to face her. If that's, he searched for the word. If that's what you want. A moment, her eyes on his, the late afternoon light catching the lenses of her glasses, catching the gold of her hair. It's what I want, she said. He let out a breath that he seemed to have been holding for 12 years. She started walking again. He caught up, reached for her hand and held it tightly, like he was never letting go again. The next 2 days were, by any measure, the most complicated of Jun-Yi's adult life. It wasn't that keeping a secret was new to him. He was generally a private person, he had always been. But this particular secret had a face, and that face wore glasses, and it was currently sitting across the breakfast table from him every morning looking completely unbothered while he tried to remember how to hold a fork. The arrangement they had agreed on in the cake shop was simple in theory. Act normal. Don't draw attention. Don't give Chris a reason to look twice. Wait until after the wedding when the celebrations were fully wound down, and then carefully, honestly, tell him. Simple. Except Sylvia, apparently, had decided that acting normal meant engaging fully with everyone at the table, laughing easily, leaning over to steal Chris's toast without asking, charming every bridesmaid in the house within 48 hours. She was warm and present and completely herself, and Jun-Yi sat across from all of this and had to perform the elaborate theatre of not caring. Namju was not helping. Namju had decided, with great enthusiasm and no awareness of the current situation, that this was the week he would pursue Sylvia with the focused energy he usually reserved for business ventures. He appeared at her elbow at meals. He saved her a seat during the wedding rehearsals. He offered her his jacket on the evening walk to the garden, and she had accepted it with a polite smile that Jun-Yi observed from 8 feet away with an expression he hoped read as indifferent. It did not read as indifferent. On the second evening, one of the bridesmaids, a cheerful woman named Hana who had a gift for reading rooms, appeared beside Jun-Yi during a rehearsal dinner and said pleasantly, "She's lovely, isn't she?" Jun-Yi took a sip of his water. "Who?" Hana smiled slowly. "Sylvia. You've been watching her for a while now. I'm watching the whole room. You're watching one specific part of the room that happens to contain Sylvia and Namju." Jun-Yi set his glass down and turned to give Hana a look that he intended to be dismissive. She received it with complete serenity. "Just saying," she added. "The way she doesn't look at you is very interesting too." She walked away before he could respond. He turned back to the room. Across the space, Sylvia glanced at him just briefly, just a flick of her eyes over Namju's shoulder and looked away. But in that half-second he caught something, a flicker of something dry and knowing. She was finding this funny. He made a point of smiling at the bridesmaid nearest to him, Yon, he thought her name was, and laughing at something she said. He did not look in Sylvia's direction for the rest of the evening. He looked in her direction 6 more times before the evening ended. That same evening, Jun-Yi and Sylvia found each other simultaneously in the narrow corridor. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said, a pause. "Namju gave you his jacket last night," Jun-Yi said. He had intended to say something else, literally anything else. Sylvia tilted her head. "Well, it was cold. You have a cardigan. It wasn't with me at that moment. You could have just gone to get one. Or, she said sweetly, I could accept a jacket from someone who offered one. He crossed his arms. I'm not saying you shouldn't. Then why are you bringing it up? I'm just noting that it seemed. It seemed what? Her voice was still light, still controlled, but her eyes were very bright. It seemed what, Junyi? He uncrossed his arms. He picked up a towel from the shelf. You know what, forget it, it was nothing, good night. Well, she said with the tone of a woman who knew what she was doing and knew she had won. Junyi knew this was probably payback for rejecting her. He went back to his room. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. He was in an enormous amount of trouble. The next secret conversation happened outside the rehearsal room in the morning of the wedding. This one was genuinely whispered, because Chris was 30 feet away discussing flowers with the coordinator. Junyi had pulled Sylvia gently by the elbow into the side corridor, not dramatically, just enough to talk. He keeps looking at me, Junyi said quietly. Chris, no, Namju, Sylvia blinked. That's your concern right now. He's going to say something to Chris. Something about noticing. He's not going to say anything, he's just being friendly. She paused and smiled. Are you jealous? No, she studied him. Her glasses had slipped slightly down her nose and she pushed them back up with one finger unhurried. You are, that's so cute, she said. I'm not. It's okay. Her voice dropped softer. Beneath the teasing there was something genuine in it. You don't have to perform the whole thing, I can see it. He looked at her for a moment. The corridor was narrow and the rehearsal noise from the other room filled the silence between them. I don't like watching someone else be the one who makes you smile, he said. His voice was low, honest in the way that only came from being tired of performing the opposite. I know I don't have the right to say that yet, but you asked. Sylvia was quiet. Her expression had gone very still, not cold but careful, like she was holding something she didn't want to drop. We have to wait until the end of today, she said finally. I'm trying. They parted because Lily was searching for Sylvia. Junyi walked back into the rehearsal room. She followed a few seconds later from the other direction. Chris, still deep in conversation with the coordinator, did not notice. Lily, standing by the window arranging a small vase of flowers, noticed everything. She kept her eyes on the vase and smiled at the blooms. An hour before the wedding, the house grew quieter earlier than usual because people had begun to depart for the church. Junyi stood holding a small flat box. Inside was a pair of glasses, sleek, elegant, slightly different from the ones she wore, but the same essential shape. He had noticed the frames she wore were slightly bent at the left hinge, and something about that had stayed with him. The second item was small, a delicate charm on a thin bracelet, shaped like a folded paper crane, the kind they used to fold out of gold foil in Chris's kitchen when they were teenagers. Sylvia had loved those. She used to line them up on the windowsill until Chris knocked them all over, and she would spend another 20 minutes rebuilding them without ever actually getting angry. He didn't know why he had kept that memory. He hadn't thought about it in years until suddenly he had, and then he hadn't been able to stop. He walked down the corridor to her room. He knocked twice quietly, a pause, then the sound of movement. The door opened and Sylvia was there in her yellow bridesmaid dress and her old glasses. She looked at him. I thought you had left for the church already. Almost. He held out the box. Here, she looked at it. She took it slowly and opened it. Her expression changed. It moved through several things in the space of a few seconds, surprise, recognition, confusion, and then arrived somewhere more fragile that she tried to keep from her face and didn't quite manage. She picked up the bracelet, turned it in her fingers. The little crane caught the corridor light. I used to make those, she said softly. In Chris's kitchen, on the windowsill. He leaned against the doorframe. I remembered. She looked up at him. Her eyes were full of something she wasn't saying. And the glasses, your hinges bent. Simple, I noticed. She looked down at the box again. She was quiet for long enough that he started to wonder if he had miscalculated, if this was too much, if it had landed wrong, and then she looked up. You remembered the cranes, she said. I remember a lot of things, he said quietly. I just didn't know what to do with them. She stepped closer, just barely, just enough, and before he could say anything else, she stood on her toes and kissed him. It was brief, and then it wasn't. He held still for exactly 1 second, the box between them at an awkward angle, and then his hand came up to her face, careful, like something he didn't want to startle, and the kiss became something warmer and realer and the kind that answered questions you hadn't quite asked yet. When she stepped back, she was looking at him with a shy but bright smile. You need to leave before anyone notices. Besides, we're late. Then the door opened. Both of them turned. Chris stood there in his dark tailored suits, clearly not prepared for what he had just encountered. He looked at them, at the space between them, at Junyi's hand still resting on Sylvia's cheeks. His face shifted. Junyi saw it happen. The warmth drained, the calculation came in, and then Chris's eyes dropped to Junyi's face and found what they were looking for. What's going on? His voice was flat. Chris, Sylvia started, masking him. Chris's eyes didn't move from Junyi's face. His jaw was tight. What is going on? Junyi straightened. We were talking. In her room. I can't believe this. You're trying to hook up with my sister because of a bet we made. Junyi went cold. A girlfriend before the wedding is over, Chris said. His voice was very controlled. That was the deal. You agreed to it before she even walked through the door. He looked at Sylvia. His face broke just slightly at the edges. Did you know about the bet? Sylvia's expression stilled. What bet? He gets a girlfriend before the end of the wedding week. I do anything he asks. Chris's eyes moved back to Junyi, and what was in them now wasn't just anger, it was the particular wound of someone who thought they knew a person. Did you use my sister to win a bet? No. Junyi's voice was immediate and clear, but Chris moved. It was fast and his fist connected before Junyi had fully registered it was coming. He took it on the jaw, staggered back one step and didn't go down. Sylvia immediately stepped in front of Junyi. She walked the 2 steps between them and placed herself directly in the space where Chris would have had to go through her to reach Junyi again. Chris. Her voice was not raised. That was the thing about it, it didn't need to be. It carried the full weight of a woman who had decided exactly how this was going to go. Stop this. Chris's chest was heaving. He was looking at her with something desperate in his face. Sylvia, if he was using you for a bet. I know about the bet, she said. I heard about it the same day you made it, Chris. I'm not a kid anymore. She kept her voice steady. I chose this not because of a bet, not because of anything except that I decided to. Do you understand the difference? Chris swallowed. His fists were still loosely clenched at his sides. She's right. Junyi stepped around her, not in front of her, beside her. He touched his jaw once and then dropped his hand. His voice was quiet. The bet existed before Sylvia arrived. What happened between us has nothing to do with it. I would never do that to her, and I would never do it to you. Chris looked between them. His jaw worked. I have wanted to do things right with your sister for a long time, Junyi said. I was afraid I made wrong choices. But I'm asking you now directly, at least allow me try. Allow me be someone worth trusting her to. The room was very quiet. Chris's eyes moved to Sylvia's. She looked back at him steady with the particular expression of a younger sibling who has fully become their own person and is waiting for you to see it. Something gave way in Chris's face. It moved slowly, the anger retreating, leaving behind something more honest and exhausted and ultimately, reluctantly fond. He pointed at Junyi. If you hurt her, he said, I'm going to make you regret it in ways you don't have the imagination to predict. That's fair, Junyi said. Chris exhaled long and slow. He looked at his sister. Are you sure about this, Sylvia? I've never been more sure of anything, Sylvia said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he crossed the room and hugged her, one arm around her shoulders, quick and firm. He stepped back. He looked at Junyi for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Junyi took it. The church moved through its normal routine in organized waves. Lily was a vision of calm that fooled no one who knew her. Underneath it she was vibrating with joy so large it kept leaking out in the form of tears. She quickly laughed away. Chris could not stop smiling. Every seat was filled. Every face was turned toward the aisle. Sylvia stood with the group watching, in her yellow dress, her ginger hair falling in soft waves. She had her new glasses on, the ones from the box. They fit perfectly. She didn't mention it to anyone, but twice during the ceremony she touched the bracelet on her wrist without realizing she was doing it. Chris stood at the end of the aisle with the kind of stillness that only comes from certainty. When Lily appeared, he pressed his lips together and looked up, and everyone who saw it understood why. The vows were theirs, written by both of them, full of the private language of 2 people who had chosen each other completely. There was laughter at some of it, and silence at other parts, and someone in the 3rd row needed a tissue by the end. Junyi stood not far from Sylvia. At some point during the vows, their hands found each other at their sides, quietly, without announcement. Her fingers curled around his. He looked straight ahead with a wide grin. At the bouquet toss, someone nudged Sylvia forward into the loose crowd of women who had gathered with varying degrees of willingness. She protested mildly and then gave up protesting when Lily turned around, caught her eye specifically, and threw the bouquet with the directional precision of a woman who had thought about this. The flowers arced through the air. Sylvia caught them with both hands, purely out of reflex. The crowd cheered. She looked down at the bouquet. Then she looked up and across the space. Junyi was watching her. He raised both eyebrows very slightly. She raised one in return. He laughed. She bit back a smile and looked away. Later, much later in the garden, after the dinner and the dancing and the speeches and the cake that had, against all odds, arrived intact and been consumed with great enthusiasm, the air grew quieter. Guests had drifted to the edges, sitting in small groups, the evening winding down the way the best evenings do, slowly, reluctantly. No one quite ready to let it end. Junyi found Sylvia near the garden wall, her heels in one hand, looking at the lights strung through the trees. He stopped beside her. She leaned her shoulder against his arm, easy and natural, like it was something she'd done 1,000 times. He didn't move away. 1 week, she said. 1 very long week. Very stupid week, she amended. The cake, the dog, the zipper. AC. The AC was a legitimate grievance. Absolutely not. She smiled at the lights. He looked at her, the glasses, the ginger waves, the bracelet catching the fairy lights, and felt something settle in his chest in the specific way of things coming to rest after a long time in motion. Going back to London, he said, not a question this time, just a fact that needed to be said aloud. Eventually. She tilted her head slightly toward him. But I'm not going anytime soon. And after today, she turned enough to look at him. Her expression was open in a way it hadn't been when she first walked through that door a week ago, all guarded calm and careful armor. This was different, this was her. After today we figure it out, she said. Together, he nodded slowly. Then I have an idea for a first date. You do? Saturday, there's a place I know. She smiled, clearly excited. Saturday came with a blue sky and the particular brightness of a city that has no idea what kind of week you just had. Sylvia stepped outside to find Junyi at the bottom of the steps. He was holding the largest bouquet of roses she had ever seen in her life. Deep red, wrapped in brown paper, so many stems that both his arms were occupied and he could barely see over the top of them. She stopped on the second step. She stared. I bought the biggest I could carry, he said from somewhere behind the flowers. She started laughing. She couldn't help it. Junyi. You going to help me with these? She came down the last 2 steps and took half the bouquet from him. And for a moment they were both holding this enormous, ridiculous, wonderful bundle of roses on a Saturday morning on a quiet street. And she was still laughing. And he was looking at her the way she had spent 12 years telling herself she had imagined. She hadn't imagined it. He tucked a single rose that had escaped the paper back into her side of the bouquet, and then held out his hand, free now and open. She put her hand in his, and they walked. If you've made it to the end of this story, first, thank you for staying. But let's talk about what we actually just watched, because there's more here than a love story. Junyi spent 12 years making a choice that felt safe, protecting a friendship, by letting someone else carry the cost of it. And Sylvia spent 12 years believing she wasn't worth fighting for. Neither of them were villains. They were just afraid. That's so human it should be uncomfortable to watch. What this story actually teaches us is that the conversations we refuse to have don't go away. They wait. They sit in the back of our chests and turn into 12 years of silence and a very unfortunate cake situation. It teaches us that growing up doesn't mean growing out of feelings. It means becoming someone who can finally hold them with honesty, instead of hiding them behind pride or fear. It teaches us that being chosen by someone who knows your history, who remembers the paper cranes on the windowsill, and still shows up with the biggest bouquet they can carry, is worth every difficult conversation you had to have to get there. And it teaches us that sometimes love doesn't arrive in a grand declaration. Sometimes it arrives in a stuck zipper and an argument about the AC and 2 people standing in the rain laughing at how much time they wasted. Waste the time. If you loved this story, hit that like button right now. It means more than you think. Subscribe so you never miss when we drop a new one. And drop a comment below. What scene got you smiling the most? Was it the balcony, the cake shop in the rain? Or the moment Sylvia stepped in front of Junyi and told her brother she chose this? Tell us. We're happy to listen. See you in the next one.